All right, so this is blurry. This is finding the equation of the circle. If you're given the center and then a point on the circle or the end points of the diameter. So make sure you'd be able to find the circle, the equation of which is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So for the center, the origin, and the point on the circle, I would literally just plug in 0, 0, x, y as your hk and your xy, and then find r squared, plug it all back in, right? For the endpoints of the diameter, how are you going to find the center? Midpoint, right? So the midpoint between those two is going to give you the center. And then you have choices when you want to find the radius. Either find the distance, cut it in half, but that gets tricky when it's a square root. Or then take your center and one of those coordinate points and plug it into your equation, which is probably the method I would recommend. Good morning. Then comes the standard form of the equation if it's complete the square. So this one you're going to complete the square on. Remember, I'm only going to give you one complete the square, but it could be any of the conics. So you want to practice it each time. So there's like one built into the review each time. You could get a circle, you could get a parabola, you could get an ellipse, you could get a hyperbola. Which means if you're, if it's a parabola, you only have to complete the square once, but all the other ones you got to complete the square twice. Sometimes there's a coefficient, sometimes there's not. So you just want to make sure in each section there should be one that you're practicing it.
So number 5, will we use the distance and divide by the distance formula and divide by 2?
You can, or you can find the center and you can plug in a point. So in my experience, people make less mistakes on that second method. If you find the distance, you divide by 2, and there's a square root involved, people make dumb moves. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. All right, then comes the same. Yeah.
For number 9, like for the ones that if we're completing the square, and like, are you gonna like tell us which one we have to find like on a test, or how do we like just know from like looking?
You mean how do you know what that is?
Yeah.
So you have two options. One is complete the square, put it into standard form, and then identify it. The other is you can use your classification on these. So because this doesn't have an XY term, look at your A and look at your C. They're the same. That's a circle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you can use your classification on the complete the square to figure out what it is before you even start.
Ms. Quizriser?
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, can you repeat the thing that you said about like how many questions we're graphing, how many questions are just...
There's 4 questions on graphing, for one for each conic, one involving complete the square.
And then how many questions are there on the test total?
There's 9. There's 4 questions in which I give you the information and you have to find the equation. One for each conic. And then there's the classification question.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so for 11, you also have to complete the square. For 13, you're finding the X and Y intercepts, so you're just plugging 0 in for each one. And then it switches to parabolas. So all of that is circles. And then it switches to parabolas. So the parabolas, you've got your equation here. You want to just get it into standard form. And then you want to find the vertex, the focus, and the directrix, which is what you will do on the test, and draw the graph of the parabola. In number 19, now it's the reverse. It's giving you the vertex and the focus. You want to find the equation. So use that information to determine which direction your parabola is facing. Use that information to determine if P is positive or negative, and then plug it into your equation. So remember, this is either x minus h squared equals 4p y minus k, or it's y minus k squared equals 4p x minus h. So this one would open up or down. This one would open right or left. Yeah.
You find the focus again by looking at the 4p, right?
Yeah. So just p. Once you from the equation, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So set whatever's in front of that 4p equal to the number. Solve for p, and then that's the distance you either move right or left or up or down. Yeah. So the only other thing I would say on this is that there could be a complete the square that leads to your parabola. That's it. Everything else is pretty straightforward with the parabolas. I could give you the vertex and the directrix, or I could give you the focus and the directrix. So you would want to know how to find all the pieces based on all of that, okay? So if I gave you the vertex and the focus, you plot it, you find the distance, you find the direction, you're done. If I give you the vertex and the directrix, same thing, draw it out, figure out which direction it faces, count your P, and then figure out your equation from there. If I give you the focus and the directrix, you're going to have to find the vertex, which is halfway between those two, then find the P, and then figure out from there your equation. All right, 9-2 was your ellipses. So same thing here. You're either going to get the equation like these, where you have to find the center, the vertices, the foci. You can cross out eccentricity. Again, I didn't put it on your test. And then sketch the graph. This says use a graphing utility to verify. You're not going to have a graphing utility on your test. Don't waste your time. You can look at the solutions. Yep.
Are we gonna be allowed to have a handheld tomorrow?
No. Tomorrow, nada. Monday, I put the lockdown so you can use like a 4 function, but that's it. Yeah. And it was really only to help with the multiplication of the numbers. That's it. You don't need it. So this is x minus h squared over a squared plus y minus k squared over b squared equals 1 if it's horizontal. And if it's vertical, x minus h squared, well, let me reverse the order because we've done it every time. It doesn't matter because that could come first, but y minus k squared over a squared plus x minus h squared over b squared equals 1. But I want to stress the y doesn't have to come first. Remember, the a is the larger denominator here. It doesn't have to come first. So when you look at 29, this is actually a vertical ellipse because the A is under the Y, even though it comes second. Same for 27. Those would both be vertical. Yeah.
What's the difference between that and the hyperbola?
The equation,
Yeah.
the hyperbola gets a minus between,
Okay.
and the A is first, always. Okay, then comes the equation. So here again, this is your practice for complete the square. You're going to find the standard form of the equation, find the center of the vertices, the foci. You can ignore the eccentricity, okay, and then sketch the graph. Again, you can ignore the use the graphing utility because you can just use the solutions to check it. Then comes the reverse of the ellipse, where you could be given the vertices and the foci. Those are the vertices and the foci. You could be given the vertices and the major axis, the minor axis, that kind of stuff. So all different kinds of information. Remember, major would be 2a, minor would be 2b, and remember, c squared equals a squared minus b squared on an ellipse. So if I gave you the vertices and the foci, you basically can find your center, your a, and your c. If I gave you, let's say, the major axis and the foci, it's the same. You'd have your A, you'd have your C. If I gave you the minor axis and the foci, now you have your B and your C. So make sure that you understand all those different kinds of information. Both of these are vertices and foci, but it could be a mix of all that stuff. Then came the hyperbolas. Okay, so the hyperbolas, the two formulas for two equations for hyperbolas, x minus h squared over a squared minus y minus k squared over b squared equals 1, and that's if it's horizontal. And then y minus k squared over a squared minus x minus h squared over b squared equals 1, and that's if it's vertical. This time, a is always first. C squared equals a squared plus b squared, and the asymptotes are y equals k plus and minus b over a x minus h if it's horizontal, y equals k plus and minus a over b x minus h if it's vertical. So in this case, you're given the vertices and the foci. You're given, I actually think I tell you in the directions not to worry about the asymptotes. I won't give you that, but your a over b there would be that too. But I'm not going to give you the asymptotes. You're either going to get like the vertices and the foci. Remember the conjugate axis is the same thing as the minor axis. The transverse is the same thing as the major axis. That's the kind of information that you would get.
So we're not going to find any of the asymptotes for our, we're just going to do the box thingy, and then...
You're going to have to give me the equation of the asymptote on the graphing one. So like on the ones that are over here that say graph, you're going to have to do the asymptotes. So it'll give you a line and it's going to ask for the circle. Wait, no, sorry, not those. Hang on, not that one. These. I thought it said it. You're going to have to find the equation, the center, the vertices, the foci, and the asymptotes. Not the eccentricity. Yeah.
I have a question. Like when you write out the asymptote, like how you did
Mhm.
the other one, like you don't have to like I don't know what it's called, but you have to like.
Nope, you don't have to distribute. You can leave it as the k plus and minus.
Like even with the fraction.
Yeah. Because you're using the graph to, like, if you use the box. If you're using the box to get your asymptotes, you don't need that equation to get your asymptotes. If you don't use the box, that equation then has to get into slope-intercept form for you to know how to graph it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But we use the box, so you don't need it.
Can you go back for 1 second?
To this part? Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So again, think of like different kinds of information you could get here. You could get vertices, you could get foci, you could get co-vertices and foci. You could get the length of the major axis or the transverse axis and the foci. So just understand all that different kinds of information. Yeah.
Can you zoom out? Like,
Yeah, sure, as soon as Christian's done. Good. To the top, Valerie, or back like this?
like that.
Okay.
I can use that for the first page, please.
Sure. Oh, I should have highlighted sketch because obviously you're going to graph that, yeah. So this is, again, your complete the square. On the hyperbola. You're only going to do it for one conic, but from that you're going to then graph. So this you're saving because this is Monday's part. Okay, this A equals C is a circle. A times C equals 0 is a parabola, which means one of them is missing. A times C is positive, it's an ellipse. A times C is negative, it's a hyperbola. For both those bottom two, A cannot equal C though. Remember, if A equals C, it's a circle. I didn't forget, Valerie. I'll go back. I just wanted to write that out, and then we're kind of done with the notes on the review.
Okay, wait, I have one more question.
Yeah.
For the questions on Friday, are we gonna have to, is it gonna be like, you give us the equation, we just graph it, or are we gonna have to like complete the square and then like find the standard form and then graph it?
So you're going to have to do the complete the square once, and then the other times you're going to get given the equation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. It just could be any of the conics. So just be prepared that you could be completing the square for a hyperbola, an ellipse, a parabola, or a circle. And then the other ones, I'll give you the equations. You might have to move them around, like in the example on the review, the parabola one, you had to move around to put in a standard form. You didn't have to complete the square, but you did have to move it. Could be like that. But or like divide by the number on the other side of the equal sign to get it to be equal to 1 for an ellipse or hyperbola. It might not be already in standard form, but it wouldn't have to complete the square. Yeah.
So if it's not a completing the square on the graphing, it's basically, it's like, you think it's an easy question to get, basically, if you know how to graph it?
If you understand it, yeah. And it will ask for vertices, co-vertices. Like, it's going to ask for all the parts. So that, like it's, like say it's 10 points, each little part is gonna, so it's gonna ask for the center. If it's an ellipse, center, vertices, co-vertices, and then graph, and foci. If it's a hyperbola, it's center, vertices, co-vertices, asymptotes, foci, and graph.
Could you go over number 49?
49? All right, so I'm gonna complete the square for 49. I'm going to group together the 9x squared, the 18x, and then the negative 16y squared, the negative 32y, and then I'm going to bump the 151 to the other side. I got to get rid of those coefficients, so I'm taking the 9 out. 9 comes out, x squared minus 2x, negative 16 comes out. Complete these squares, take that 2. Divide it by 2, it's 1. 1 squared is 1, so I add the 1 here. I would normally add the 1 here, but I have to multiply by 9 first. So now I'm adding 9. Repeat that process with the y. 2 divided by 2 is again 1. 1 squared is 1, add the 1. Normally I'd add the 1, but I'm multiplying by a negative 16 this time. So I'm actually subtracting 16. So on the right-hand side, 151 plus 9 is 160, minus 16 is 144. Good so far? Yeah, okay. So then factor the left side. Leave the 9 out, square root the first term, square root the last term, take the sign from the middle, put it in parentheses and square it. Minus 16, square root the first term, square root the last term, sign from the middle, put it in the parentheses and square it. Now we knew this is a hyperbola because the directions said it, but think it's just going to say put the conic into standard form. And then if it literally says, if it's a circle, find the radius in this. If it's a parabola, find this. If it's an ellipse, find this. If it's a hyperbola, find this. But so if the directions didn't tell you, remember you can do your AC check. If I multiply those two, it's negative. So this is a hyperbola, and I know that from the AC. Does that make sense? From the classification? That way I don't have to wait all the way till I get to here. Because if I wait all the way till I get to here, and I divide everything by 144, because that's what you would normally do if it's a hyperbola, what if it's a circle? If it's a circle, I don't divide everything by what's on the other side, the equal side. If it's a circle, I get rid of the coefficients. So it's better to know what you're getting yourself into before you even go all the way through. So I would say try to figure out what the classification is before you start to complete the square. Then you'll know from there what to do.
What are all the classification things again?
The AC stuff?
Yeah.
This. Okay, so now I know this is a hyperbola, so I have to get the other side equal to 1. So I divide everything by 144. 9 goes into 144 16 times, and 16 goes into 144 9 times. So I end up with x minus 1 squared over 16 minus y plus 1 squared over 9 equals 1. So that's the first part. Get it into the standard form. If this was a question that didn't tell me it's a hyperbola, then that's going to be part of my work. I'm going to say, okay, I know this is a hyperbola. Is it vertical or horizontal? Horizontal. Because the x comes first. What's the a squared? 16, which means a is 4. What's the b squared? 9, which means b is 3. I could tell you my asymptotes already, right? Oh, my center, sorry, is the last thing I have to find. Center. 1, negative 1. So I can already tell you the asymptotes before I even get to the graph. Y equals negative 1 plus and minus. Because it's horizontal, it's b over a. 3 over 4, x minus 1. And that can get left just like that. Then comes the graph. So my center is 1, -1. I'm going right and left the A because it's horizontal. So I'm going right and left 4. And those are my vertices. -3, -1, and 5, -1. I'm going up and down the B, which is 3. And those are my co-vertices. 1, 2, 1, -4. I'm going to draw the little box. On your test, I would actually recommend like a straight edge, whether that's an ID or a ruler or something, so that you can make that sort of easy on yourself. And then because it's horizontal, the parabolas point right and left, or the branches point right and left. As wide without touching your asymptotes as you can get it. And then the last thing I need to find is my foci. So c squared equals a squared plus b squared, because this is a hyperbola. C squared equals 16 plus 9. C squared equals 25. C would equal the square root of 25, which is 5. So I'm going right and left 5 from my center. So I go right 5, and I go left 5, which means my foci, let me do a different color, are -4, -1, and 6, -1. If it was not a whole number, if it was like square root 5, then I would just say, take your center, which is that 1, -1, and do 1 plus and minus square root 5. So you could leave it like that. You don't need to graph your foci because you're going to give them to me on your actual line. So if you need it like that to find the foci, you can. But if you don't need to graph it, you don't have to either. Yeah. You're welcome. So I will tell you that's like 2 questions kind of put together. If it's a complete the square one, it's not going to ask you for all the parts of the if it's a hyperbola, it just asks you for the center of the vertices and the co-vertices. It doesn't ask you for the asymptotes. So you just find parts of it. But if it's here's the equation, graph it, you're finding all those parts.
We wanted to graph the foci for any of them.
No, you'll give it to me, like on the line, you'll write it, but you don't have to graph it. That's not true, actually, sorry, parabola, you have to graph it. Parabola only has those 3 parts. Yeah.
Are we gonna have to find the foci if we're given if we're given the vertex and the directrix, then we have to find,
For parabola, you mean?
Yeah.
So where you're finding the equation?
Yeah.
No. So if I give you the equation on the parabola, yes, you're finding all 3 parts. If I give you 2 of the parts and I'm asking you for the equation, you don't have to find the missing part.
Is our C ever going to be a non-square root number?
Yeah.
I mean, is it ever going to be a square root, sorry?
A what?
Is it ever going to be a square root?
Yeah. Yeah, most of the time it is, actually. I would say it's more common that it's not a perfect square than that it is. Yeah. Any other questions you want to work out? All right, I think you need to work. I think a lot of you have waited till today to start to review, so you need to work. I'm going to let you work. Okay? I do have like